Welcome to Mourning, a podcast where we share our experiences around letting go of grief and learn to move with grace through mourning. We are your hosts, Alyce Christina
and Crystal Lee, two friends who connected through yoga and movement and ultimately found a deeper connection over our own parental losses.
We share how our experiences have informed us to live our lives more authentically, boldly, and in the now so that you can do the same. We believe where there is pain, there is transformation.
From the loss of a loved one to change in a career, a heartbreak, identity shift, and many other forms of loss, we walk this path together.
To discover the light within the darkness, we recognize the joy within pain and invite you to dive in with us as we share in the hope, laughter, and lightness of the mourning journey.
Join us for stories, interviews, and conversations that connect us as we explore the universal experience of loss that invokes the becoming of one's true self.
Welcome to the Mourning Call podcast. We are your hosts, Alyce
and Crystal.
And today we are going to be continuing the conversation around the loss of identity and how that shows up in our lives in various ways, from job loss to end of a relationship, to the end of a way of being, piggybacking off of our conversation with Crystal's sister, who grieved the loss of her identity when she retired from being a rugby player. If you haven't listened, go back an episode. Yeah, what are some other ways, Crystal, that we experience a loss of identity?
I think a job loss or any sort of like profession change, right? Like it might be a choice you're making and it doesn't necessarily have to be negative. You could be shifting careers and doing something totally different. So it could be equally, like bittersweet, maybe sad, but exciting. Friendship loss, I think that could be a whole episode, because sometimes our identities are wrapped up in maybe a certain friend group, things we do with friends. And if that shifts, what does that look like?
Absolutely. And I think that, in discussing the loss of a way of being, I know for a large part of my life, I didn't necessarily experience a loss. It was in finding myself and my true voice and my true understanding and embracing myself. However, I witnessed people around me who thought I was happy being one way, experienced all kinds of confusion around my conscious choice to step into something new, and a new way of being and a new way of leading my life. That was an interesting grieving period. That came around a period of time when I was getting a divorce, right? And so I found myself constantly having to explain the ways in which I hindered myself and hindered my truth, but also left a lot of people really confused, which is an interesting dynamic to go through. And I think one of the big experiences of an identity loss that I experienced in a very interesting way would be when I became a mother.
I think that will resonate with obviously a lot of people who are moms, because there's definitely a before and after, in good, confusing, profound, different ways, right? You are kind of one person before you become a mom, and you certainly shift into a whole new being and way of being and identity. So what are the ways you feel that your identity shifted when you had Amelia?
Yeah, absolutely. I'm going to rewind to pre-Amelia and share. So I was a dancer. I am a dancer, still am, dancing professionally. And in the moment where I decided that becoming a mother, getting pregnant, going through that process was something I wanted to do, I immediately started saying to myself, I'm not sure if I said it to anyone else, that I was hanging up my dancing shoes. Right? That I would no longer be a dancer, that I was retiring, at
I didn't
the
know that.
ripe old age of 27. And
The baby.
right, because and I think that was very freeing because it was a conscious choice, not an injury or someone was firing me or I was let go from a job, right? Like the choice to retire was my choice, and it allowed like some freedom for me to truly be in the space of nurturing my body in a way that I had never experienced, especially when I got pregnant. I think that like I embodied being a mother even before I became pregnant, which really helped when I did become pregnant. um, it was probably the first time I experienced um, eating out of, because I was hungry and not trying to suppress that hunger. Like it was no longer about me. And and then gosh, I mean, just the whole birth process, giving birth, the recovery process. I have shared with many, there was definitely a period of time in the beginning where I I'm like, I'm good for is milk and nursing. Like I feel like a cow. This is like I would
You're like, I'm a dairy cow. This is great.
yeah, I nursed her, I pumped, I was very blessed to have a surplus of milk to offer. And then there was a shift in me that all of a sudden I was and still am being this living, breathing example of a woman that I want my daughter to see. Right? Like I don't, and I still, and it's work to this day. Like I don't want Amelia to see me looking in a mirror, judging myself or my body. Um, and that's continuous work. Like, and so there began like this internal conversation of who I was being as a mother and who I was being as a wife. And I got really clear that I was no longer in love with the the wife part. And because I wasn't being encouraged to be my fullest self. And I think that there was um Amelia's father and I were very young. I was 22 when we got married, 20 when we met. Um we were going on 10 years together by the time we had Amelia. And there was just like I felt stuck and I felt scared to be my fullest self. And so it started to be this conversation of like, who am I? Right? Like a really digging deep and finding it's like, yes, I'm a mother, but I want to be the example of not just a mother. I want to be a woman that my daughter can look up to. And I don't want to be in a relationship for 30 more years. I could have easily done that. I could have suppressed my feelings. I could have had two more children. I could have dedicated the next 30 years to raising my children and probably woken up 30 years later, they're out of the house and rolled over and be like, I resent you and I resent my choices.
Or 30 years of asking, who am I? Like you went ahead and let yourself flourish and be who you really are versus suppressing the real you for 30 years and showing your daughter that. You know what I mean? Like she would eventually see you blossom into like your true self.
That's what so many people do out of fear of, I mean, I imploded my relationship. No one saw it coming. That's a discussion for another episode. Um and I do know that like I didn't take the courageous step forward of like asking, and what transpired too was like I also didn't have a plan in place. I had slowly started coming back to dancing. It was interesting. So I'll rewind of like saying that I retired, prior to having Amelia. My sister and I had babies about 6 months apart. And um and so like we were pregnant, our pregnancies overlapped for a period of time, which was super sweet. And my sister was a big runner and ran marathons, and I was like, I am not a runner. And so after I had Amelia, I didn't want to go back to dancing because I was scared. I didn't know how it was going to feel in my body. Amelia, when I was pregnant with Amelia, I gained close to 90 pounds. It was a lot, and I was very specific. Even
Your body felt different. Like you're like, my body's totally
my
different.
body was so different. And I knew the kind of pressure that I used to put on myself. So from like a fear-based perception of myself, I was like, I don't want to dance. But my sister got me to start running with her, and we trained for a 5K in New Orleans the weekend of my cousin's wedding and the Crescent City run. And so it was like running all through the city we grew up in and had, visited consistently growing up. And it was really, truly a new, like, eye opening experience to be on foot and running to all these places. Um, I finished. I accidentally drank beer in the middle of it. I thought it was water, it was beer. Thank you, New Orleans. Um, and then afterwards, too, I was like, done. I don't ever want to do that again. Right. But that was also kind of like pushing my body in a different way. Um, was almost an opening to me falling like back into myself. Right. And really unearthing this identity that I had been afraid of, and then auditioned for Moving Poets, was restarting after several year hiatus of not performing and working in Charlotte. And Sarah Emery, one of the former dancers, was restarting it back up in Charlotte. And I reached out to her and I was like, I want to work backstage. I want to do costumes. I want to do everything but dance. And she was like, Alyce, just come to the audition. Just come move. I've seen you. Like I had slowly started to take classes here and there. And it was really, from running back to like, okay, I feel ready to really move my body in this different, this the way that I know how to move my body, but also a very different sensation of moving my body. I was like this like pressure released. Like I had taken that expectation of needing to be a certain way in dance that I had carried with me for all of like from 16 to 25, right? And all of a sudden this pressure was gone and I showed up to dance because I loved it, right? It's almost like my heart, and I talk about this in the experience of losing my mom, right? Like my heart cracked open,
Yes. Yeah.
right? And I was rebuilding it and putting it back together in a very intentional way that I was having fun. Like I couldn't not smile while I was dancing. And then from that audition, I got hired. And prior to that, what was it? No, it was after that. I got hired for another long-term project with Martha Connerton. And so, like, in this process, and then my mom would come to the house and watch Amelia, or she was a baby, I think, almost a year old when all this was happening. And they would let me bring her to the studio and she would like take a nap in the corner. And when I finally went back to dancing, I said, okay, my body is mine. I was like, I'm done nursing. So people would, give her a bottle, and that was really liberating to be
Mhm.
in this experience of shedding this old version of myself. And then when everything imploded between her father and I, there's a lot of anger and frustration, and he also, for his own personal reasons and um health, moved away. So it was like I was angry at that because I thought we would separate and co-parent, and I had this perception that it would be easeful, and it wasn't. And it took, I don't know, 8 years after being divorced for me to realize that I didn't give myself time or space to mourn the loss of our relationship.
Yes. Yeah.
So then there was like, so many years later, I'm like, oh, I had attached myself to this, like, being a wife and,
Identity of being a
painting a picture, not necessarily like a true picture, but I painted the picture that I thought I was supposed to be painting. That was then, but then, there's this back and forth of like, oh yeah, we did have a good time together. We shared a lot of happy moments together, and a lot of hard moments together. And what I always have shared with Amelia is that, like, it got to a point where, like, her dad and I weren't able to support each other in growth. Like, the way we were growing
was separating.
was in opposite directions. And there is space and time to lose ourselves in that. I think it just took me a long time to realize that.
Yeah, I mean, two things come to mind based on, I mean, I'm hearing really two identity shifts or two life events that occurred around the same time that it sounds like one, which is another form of law. I mean, there's divorce, which is an end of a relationship. And it sounds like, and you tell me if I'm correct or not, but we just also change as human beings. You said you met when you were 20, you got married at 22. And I know, at least for myself, who I was at 2022 and who I was at 32 and who I am now at 42, like we just shift as humans, and like our interests shift or what we want to do. I mean, I don't know, and it sounds like you all were maybe a match at the time, and then you were growing in different directions. And we don't talk enough about that, I think, in our culture, that like it's okay to be someone different than you were 10, 20 years ago. And you allowed yourself, to your point, a lot of people will suppress that, like the change, or just not change, not allow themselves to change. And you allowed yourself to change. And some relationships, the person changes with you, and sometimes they don't.
Yeah, I mean, I think it goes back to, like, I one identity, right? We identify ourselves. Like, that's what we do. We give ourselves labels and titles, right? I'm a dancer, I'm a mother, I'm a partner, I'm a sister, I'm a X, Y, and Z. I'm bad at math. I'm a hot mess. Right. And the more we say those things, the more we become that, right? They become real. Like, and what if our purpose is not to be something, learn something, yet to become who we were born as, right? To become who we were born as, right? Because we're already born with this like pure heart, this sense of wholeness, this um I don't know, there's and it was like that's I think one of the reasons it was I heard all of my life growing up that I was the easy baby, right? And so in my head, because I heard that so much, and I don't, there was no ill intent in saying that. However, my perception of life was that it was supposed to be easy. Guess what? Life's not fucking easy.
Or you have to always be easy. So if Alyce is pissed
Right.
off, then well, oh, what is she doing? Right? Like,
Right, what is
she's there.
happening?
Right.
Right, and I felt very boxed in, and I think one of the things like dancing did for me, it allowed me to express in different ways. However, like, and in all of the any turmoil or challenge, like I kept it very like it was internal, and I hurt my body in ways because I was like, I'm not supposed to feel pain, but I do, right? Or I'm not supposed to have these big feelings, and I do, right? And so it became a very internal experience instead of being able to talk about it and share about it. And so when I will say for the rest of my life that the best thing Amelia's dad and I ever created is Amelia. Like truly, she is the best pieces of both of us, and I am so grateful, and I am so um, honored and blessed and grateful to have had that experience in life and the experience I had with her dad because it has offered me and informed who I am becoming, right? Like it has informed who and how I want to be in the world as a woman, as a mother, as a human being, right? And I think that that is a very important part of my journey to recognize and like, and using and realizing all of those things in performance and right? And then I start to live it on the other side, right? And that's why people, my parents, for one, were so confused, right?
Who
Like
are
so
you? What are you
confused of
doing?
like, right? And I was like, I wasn't a performance, but and it was like I didn't feel like I was fully myself in this experience. And then, becoming where I know that people have a very different experience of motherhood, especially in the early years. And I hope that we will have people on who have had different experiences in the future to share their stories because they are important to share. And I know that that's one of the reasons we are here. And for me, it was truly a shedding, a loss of an identity, a loss of hiding behind or being boxed in, however you want to look at it, that allowed me to like shatter my own glass ceiling. That has allowed me to bust down the walls to my boxes.
Yeah, I think um, I was going to ask, it sounds like, well, two things. One, you said, we are already born as who we're meant to be. It's just culture and society, to your point, tell us who we are, tell us who we should be, or I don't know, marketing and advertising tell us what we need and don't, I mean, God, whatever, like we just get these messages all day. And I believe, and it sounds like you believe also that like becoming one's true self is just coming back to your true self, right? It's like the shedding of these layers. And it sounds like what you're saying is that becoming a mom really people do that, I think, in certain ways, and some people don't. Some people live and die and never get back to their true self. So that's also something. But it sounds like becoming a mom, or I guess I should ask you, did was there an element of like self nurturing? Like you're nurturing this new being when Amelia was a baby. Obviously, you still nurture her today, duh. But I'm saying, when you first were a new mom, you're nurturing and caring for this new being that's on the earth. And it sounds like there was self nurturing and self healing. Like it allowed you to go back and like heal and nurture yourself. And I love that. I mean, is that right?
Absolutely. I am shaking my head ferociously over here. I I remember saying very early on after I had Amelia that if I can't take care of myself, how am I going to take care of this other human being? Right? If I can't love myself fully, how can I love anyone else fully? And it is a practice, right? I am very successful some days and very unsuccessful other days, right? And and I remember that being a struggle because I when we separated, Amelia's dad moved, we sold our house. I didn't have a full-time job. I was dancing project-based work and was like, what the hell am I doing with my life? Oh my God, I have to be a full time single mom to a 15-month-old. I can't afford help. I and yeah, and then we lost our no, we didn't lose it. We sold our house. I in the process, in reflection back, like the weight of guilt and um frustration and just wanting the whole process of separation and divorce to be over, I did not fight for our home. So I allowed Amelia's dad to sell it. I wish I would have fought for it, um looking back. And
Well, we do the best we can with like in the moment.
absolutely. And the point is, I moved in with my parents, right? My parents and my sister and her husband became this unit of support that I heavily relied on. And I am beyond grateful and blessed that I had that support and that community to fall on. And I started working at Yoga One, right, which started this whole conversation around um, the loss of community. And I I started practicing yoga consistently, like really absorbing and listening to this methodology and seeing how that was shifting me. And it became an area where my mom and I bumped heads significantly during that period of time because when she became a mother, you know, was a stay at home mom, right? She dedicated her life, which I think is an experience that our parents and grandparents experienced. Um, that there was the breadwinner and the stay-at-home parent. And and she would even say, "My whole life is you all." And I'm like, can't you see how much that hindered your expression and your experience of life by putting all of that weight on us being your whole life? And it took a lot for me. I'm not saying this happened over a couple of days. Like it has been a continuous, journey. And I got really clear in the beginning moment about needing to take care of myself. And one of the ways in which I was taking care of myself was by following my heart, right? Listening, unlocking like the my intuition, like my gut feeling on things, um, which I wound up taking a lot of risks that can hear my mom still saying, Alyce, you can't do that. You're a single mom. Right? Or it would even be a comment of like, you can't wear that. You're a 30-year-old mom. I'm like, well, I am wearing it. And I'm not 15 anymore. Thank you. Right? Like, and and it's like, well, okay, mom, either you can let me walk out the door and we can like say I love you and agree to disagree, or you can like we I can walk out and not say that, and you let what I'm wearing ruffle your feathers for no reason, right? Like, and and so there is, yeah, it was a journey, and yes, absolutely, you know, and I truly believe too, right? Love liberates. The experience of unconditional love. I remember through the process of the divorce, my mom would be like, "We love you unconditionally. We would be here for you." They've always told me that, and and I think it was truly how they showed up for me was like the first time I really saw and was experiencing my own sense of like, oh my gosh, I would do this for my daughter. Right? Like there was just this parallel that they were experiencing with me that I was able to experience with Amelia, which was so beautiful to understand that.
What you're saying, well, one part of it harkens back to when we talked about, I think, the anticipatory grief episode, maybe around acknowledging the care you need and what type of care you need and honoring that, right? Like we talked about in that episode around like tough days or whatever, but it sounds like, so I think, again, I'm not a parent, but I have so many friends that are parents and so many, well, that's not, I mean, I think to your point, maybe it's generational, but a lot of our parents and their parents didn't really do a great job around self-care in this realm. Like everything was their children. And it sounds like you really listen to that inner voice. Like, I need to care for myself to be the best person for Amelia that I can. And I think there is a shift. I guess what I was trying to say is it's tough. Like, it's not, to your point, it's not every day, but there's definitely a shift kind of with our generation and people saying, like, I can still be an amazing parent and also care for myself. And it actually makes me a better parent. And you really listen to that voice. Um, so I just think like it's so smart to honor that like knowledge of what you need in the moment. Um, and the other piece, which this could be a whole another episode, or probably should be a whole other episode, but is just your community during not just during grief and loss, but who is your community when you're going through having a new baby, moving. I mean, you talked about you moved, you got a divorce, you have a new baby. Like, I mean, it's a lot. And it's like, who are the people that are there for you? Like, those are the times in life that reveal who your people are, like who your squad or whatever, right? So it sounds like your parents stepped in, and I know you have amazing friends.
Well, I didn't have them at the time. I didn't know. I was like, it was only I really, my parents taught me, and what was preached to me, not preached, what was shared with me very often is that like my best friend is my husband, right? That my and I don't disagree with like the energy of having a friendship, and like I also just don't, I think my experience since then is like I get to fall in love with so many different people on a daily basis. Like love is a choice. It is not and so I don't have to put the weight of my entire world on one person. Like that's a lot. for anyone to
And
carry.
nobody can be
And
all the things for you. They really can't. It's impossible to be all the things.
no, and so I think for so much of, which was a failing point, to say, is when I couldn't depend on my husband, or I went to my mom and dad. Right? My mom and dad were so integrated because life was supposed to be easy. Right? And when it wasn't easy in my relationship, I went to my mom and dad to make it easy. Right? And so part of this shedding, part of this loss that I experienced to get to come into myself was understanding that in my current relationship, yes, Hudson is one of my best friends, right? But I'm not like Hudson. I love him. I love him. I choose to be with him every single day and do the grand adventures to the mundane. He's not one that's gonna like just bust a move on a dance floor, right? And so I have, a handful of people from Luis to, touring Curse, like did people that to Melanie, that show up on the dance floor with me. And that is something so special, right? And right. So in this process, like I went from a very small community of like just family and the person I chose to marry to in this process, and I had lost friends in high school. I was like, oh, again, we grew apart. I felt I was dancing, so like, but then like it was project based. So we spent, a heavy 6 weeks together and then dispersed, which like that was a community. I had started coming into my own and being with these people day in and day out. They were helping with Amelia, that, like all of these things. And then the project was over and it was gone. Okay, well then now who do I turn to? Right. And then that's when I started working at Yoga One, and they were like, oh, I'll watch Amelia in the back while you practice. Right. And so what I was cultivating, I knew I wanted something different. I knew I wanted, and I was invited into the community by a friend, two friends that I had danced with, and Chris Penix and Ty Dorn. And they were like, we work here. Come check it out. Like you'd be a great fit for the front desk, and I think they like, whether they knew or not, it was like I was opening my like that brokenness of my heart, like was that invitation in to start to rebuild it into something new. And I was learning that I have the choice to recreate, right? To drop into and rebuild the identity back to myself.
Isn't it interesting how I mean, well, dance was always a part of your life, but from a young age. But I think it's interesting how when we're getting back to ourselves, we're always doing the things that brought us joy as a child. Like, for example, I recently picked back up rollerblading. I mean, it's so random, but I rollerbladed like as a kid and like in middle school and like just stopped because I don't know, like high school, it wasn't cool or who knows, right? And then who is rollerblading in their 20s? I don't know. But now I'm doing it in my 40s.
A lot of people
Starting
now,
now, I
yeah,
guess
like it's
maybe,
coming back around.
yeah, it is like resurging. But I was like, I'm gonna get some rollerblades and I'm gonna rollerblade. And it is the amount of joy it has brought me, like just it's so amazing.
Yeah, Amelia's super into roller skating, and I rollerbladed as a child, and was completely fearful of roller skates for most of my childhood, just because rollerblades were more of a thing, and I felt more confident on rollerblades. Anyway, don't think I ever really wore roller skates as a child. And then over the pandemic, we bought roller skates. And when it was rainy outside, we'd put our roller skates on. We were living in an apartment, and we'd just go circles around each floor. People probably loved us. But we would just do circles around the apartment complex inside. Anyway, we went roller skating this week, and and it's like I'm gonna roller skate with you. Heck yeah. Um, and I exactly like I think tapping into these, the things that truly light up our sense of self and our being, and that becoming, that coming home to, it's a simplicity. Like, we don't need all of these labels. Here's a great identity loss thing, right? So it was an exercise we did. I think it was in a teacher meeting at Yoga One. Kevin Cross led it, and it was like, write all the things that you are, right? You're a mom. Or in my head, I'm a mom. I'm a dancer. I'm a daughter. I'm a sister. I'm a lover. I don't know, adventurer, all the things, right? And then it went through a series of questions that basically identified you to be able to cross everything off of your list. And the question at the end of the exercise, what's left? You are no longer any of those things. What's left? And the point of the exercise is you're still left. Your flesh and bone and spirit, like, you are whole without all of those things.
Yes, you are your true capital T, or sorry, capital S self. I was like capital T truth
True.
and capital self. Yes, capital T true, capital S self. But you are your truest self. You are your soul. You are your essence, and that is enough.
I think we get so caught up in our worlds and society and our reality of being something for others,
Mm-hmm.
right? Instead of being the thing for ourselves, right? And I am grateful again for the experiences that I've had, because Hudson and I celebrated this past March 7 years together.
Oh, yay.
And it's not always easy, and at the core of us is love, and choosing to be with each other, and choosing to grow together, and choosing, like, I remember making the commitment to myself before we met of, like, I want a relationship that honors and respects me and my fullness as an individual, not attached to someone to make me whole.
Yeah, there's like this saying that's like a relationship is two whole people coming together. It's not a half and a half. It's not a quarter and three quarters. It's two whole full selves coming together, and two whole constantly evolving selves. Also moving in, you don't have to have all the same exact desires in life, but you have to at least be open to like movement in a similar direction together, or it's not going to work.
Yeah, and making the choice too that, like, hey, we're not moving the same way together. We have a choice, right? And, like, to have the conversation, like, to be courageous, to, I don't, it's a Rumi quote about, like, you know, not picking the beautiful flower, right? And sometimes we have to walk away from the things that we love,
Yeah.
right? Like, that's the honorable thing. That's the highest calling, is to step back and be like, this is not serving me anymore. And I think that that is, a whole nother conversation of how, like, in this, even in the construct of marriage, right? We're supposed to make it work, right? And I think that there is more, even if it's run its course, right? Again, like, it's all like, I just posted something about, life is temporary, each moment, and the more we accept the briefness, moment to moment, the more present we get. Thank you for joining the Morning Call podcast. Our intention is that you found a nugget of hope, inspiration, connection, or all of the above.
If you seek to dive deeper with the Morning Call community, email us, subscribe to our page, leave a review, and fill out our survey.
We want to hear your stories and widen the conversation to support and empower our grief experiences as we collectively become our true selves.
Find us and subscribe on all streaming platforms, YouTube, and at Morning Call Podcast on Instagram. You can also email us at morningcallpodcast@gmail.com.
This podcast was edited by Alexis Carrasquillo from Familia Creative Media.